coming up is an absolutely amazing discussion between Kerry Bailey from Sydney Hypno and myself, Amanda Dounis from the Positive Thinking Clinic. We spend approximately the next hour talking about twisted thinking, or technically called cognitive distortions. And the amazing thing is, everybody can experience this. And you can also find yourself in a situation where you're running one pattern so intense or so severe that it can really disrupt your way of living, your daily routines. And so it can be a problem. We show you, as we discuss, we define each cognitive distortion. We give examples, we give some solutions, we give ideas. It's just a really friendly discussion for anybody that's interested to either learn more about it, or to find ways to beat it, or just to give you the confidence, or it's just educational. So I really hope you get to enjoy this conversation. This is Amanda Dounis. I'm from the Positive Thinking Clinic. Right at the end, if you want to find out more about either Kerry or myself, I spend about 2 to 3 minutes talking about us, how you can connect with us, where we're from, what our interests are. So I hope you watch till the end, or at least listen to the end. Welcome back, Kerry. It's so nice to have you on another episode yet again. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks for having me again.
So, Kerry, each time you and I get together, we speak about something specific and absolutely relevant to psychotherapy and hypnotherapy and counseling, or overall wellness for mental health and overall emotional wellness and strategies, and just different topics that our listeners can be interested in. And so today we've decided that we're going to speak about cognitive distortions, which is also known as a twisted way of thinking without offending anybody. And cognitive distortions, they're common. What's your experience with cognitive distortions?
Well, you know, when people are in the problem space, it's usually because there's something that's not quite right with the way that they're thinking. So, and the reason that people stay in the problem space is because they don't know how to not do that kind of thinking. So when people do come to see us, usually there's some level or some quality of at least one of those those thinking processes that's not working. And sometimes there's more than one, but usually there's something that's just a repetitive thought or a repetitive way of thinking that they're doing that actually keeps them stuck in that bind.
Yeah. And so it's like, another definition of it is distorted thinking or unreasonable thinking, or the way you and I have learned patterns.
Absolutely. So often the way that I usually say how this is for them, that they're unhelpful thinking styles. They're styles that don't serve them. So learning some new styles of thinking that will serve them to replace the old styles is the way to go.
And one of them may be all or nothing thinking, where you look at things in absolute terms, and it's like either black or white categories, and from there you can usually determine this by the language that they use. We can also see this within ourselves as to the language we use with ourselves, and we can see if we're either black and white or we're flexible. And so what I've learned in time, and what I like to discuss with clients and for our listeners who are interested, it serves you most of the time to be flexible. For example, a lot of people struggle when they think that if a situation is not perfect, then it's an absolute failure. But that's not true. That's thinking black or white. Or, for example, another one is where someone is on a diet. They're watching what they're eating, and then they have one spoon of ice cream and they said, I just ruined my diet. And so they go off and eat anything they want. But the truth is, you didn't ruin your diet. And I got this example from Gordon. He said, all you did is have one mouthful of ice cream. So we see here that this type of thinking doesn't serve you. And so I like to explore this with clients and offer them the opportunity to have a think where they do that in their lives, and therefore where they can step out of that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do, to give them an ability to consider and look at what they're doing, that pattern, and going, oh yeah, I see where I do that. Even just if they're saying something like, oh, you know, I'm not perfect, so therefore I failed, you know, that kind of all or nothing. And you can sort of say, well, you know, how does that assist you? Like, it's not actually something that's going to benefit you to think like that. So here, imagine thinking of it in this style. I'm not perfect, but I'm learning all the time and I'm improving all the time. So giving them a new style and letting them play with that, I think, is very important too.
And that's right. So we teach them how to negotiate with themselves and how to have that conversation or that discussion. A real simple way to learn to do this is, imagine you have a child that they're in the child mind. And so it's okay that they haven't learned how to negotiate with themselves or how to dismiss that thought pattern. And yet we as adults intervene to demonstrate or to role model that, oh, okay, that didn't work out, but how about? And so then we introduce to them coping skills or language skills so that cognitively they can adjust their style of thinking. And that this becomes useful if they continue to practice that straight through their teens and into their adult life.
Actually, I love the fact that you've linked the whole what they say, because the thing is, the words that you use are so integral into how you experience life and how you express yourself. So learning a new way of thinking and talking actually gives you a new way of behaving. So, you know, our language that we use, sometimes people are quite, I suppose, accidental with their language, and they get into patterns of language that just don't serve them either. And, you know, that thinking of, oh, if I don't have this, then I can't have that, or, you know, that black and white thinking, and not understanding there's all those shades of grey in between, and that actually give life all its colour and all its meaning and all its playfulness and interest. I mean, if you look just at black and white and you don't see the shadows, then, and the shades that are in between there, it's not as rich an experience.
No, that's right. That's very right. And we've always known those who are flexible usually achieve more. And so I like to, with any time that I go through any of the cognitive distortions or unreasonable ways of thinking or patterns that we detect with clients, I do get them to write down their personal examples so that they can do their own self-reflection. And then from there, say, okay, I've recognized that I have this pattern. So the next thing is, so what will you do so that you can practice a new way of being? Because that's what the unconscious mind wants. Practice. To learn something
Absolutely.
new or to unlearn something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the thing is, you know, it's sort of like one of the things that I think is really important is that people, it's what they call emotional reasoning, or that's one of the other cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking styles that comes off that. Because what happens is often people say to themselves, oh, you know, because I feel embarrassed, I must be stupid. Well, no. The thing is, often people, you know, experience things in a way that no one else is actually viewing it. It's their perspective. So I always say to people, feelings aren't evidence. Get real evidence from elsewhere, not internally. Don't take your internal feelings as evidence of something. You know, often people will feel, often people will think, oh, you know, I'm going to go into a room full of strangers and they're all going to be looking at me. I'm going to be so self-conscious. I can't believe it. And yet I actually ask them to think about, what if you're thinking that, then what are other people thinking? Perhaps they're also having those same things about themselves where they're going, oh, everybody's looking at me. So everybody's in a room going, oh, everybody's looking at me, and feeling self-conscious. Well, if that's the case, then nobody's looking at anybody for anybody to feel self-conscious. So it's not necessary. And people find that amusing because it's like, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So what we need to do is look for external evidence, not look at our own feelings as evidence or truth of what is reality.
So our message to listeners is, do not reason from how you feel.
Absolutely.
That's really important. Correct. You can't say, oh, I feel hopeless, so I must really be hopeless. No, that's not true. Like you said, where's the evidence? And that's not a good, again, that's a pattern. Oh, I feel stupid, so I must be stupid, or I don't feel like doing this, and so I'll put it off. No, you might not feel like doing this, and that doesn't mean you put it off. You do not reason from how you feel. I was once asked, do you feel like going to the gym every single day? I was baffled. I've never even thought about that. I just go. Imagine now I stopped to reason from how I feel. If I allowed myself that opportunity, Kerry, aren't I going to say, oh, I've got a bit of a headache. Oh, it's a bit cold out there, so I'm cold. And so maybe I won't go. I don't allow that opportunity to even come into my narrative at all. So do not reason from how you feel.
It's actually interesting. I often say to clients, they'll say, oh, I wanted, say they're giving up cigarettes or, stopping smoking. And they say, oh, I tried the cigarette, and so I'm still smoking. I said, but did you have another one? No. Well, then you're not smoking. You experimented a little bit. I actually don't think it's necessary to experiment to see whether or not you've got a progress. Why bother? Just have progress. But, if people do have a little backstep, then it doesn't mean that there's a failure there. But people will often say, oh, but I feel like it's like, no, it's okay. You don't actually have to be stuck in that feeling. You can actually look at the feeling and go, it's not appropriate. And you can actually say, that feeling isn't really evidenced by the results of what's going on. So I can actually step away from it and not be involved in that feeling. Not every feeling needs to be acknowledged, and not every thought needs to be acknowledged. Some just are not worth dwelling on at all.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very, very good point. So again, it's really important that clients or interested individuals who are listening take the time out to actually write down their own personal examples and think or self-reflect, do I do that? And then decide, is it helpful to do that? Maybe sometimes it is, because we're flexible, but most of the time I'm going to say it's not that useful, and therefore look for a different pattern.
Yeah, and sometimes they might want to experience a different pattern, which we can help them with. They can actually imagine themselves doing something in a scenario differently and practice that. It's an interesting thing. There was actually a study done many years ago where they had sports people. They were actually, I think they were basketballers, and they had 3 different groups. One group was, actually doing just the work. So they were going and they were just trying to, do the goals. And then they had another group where they were showing them to do the goals and then actually to think about the successful one, how they did that, their muscle memory of doing that goal. And then they had a third group, and that third group only thought about the best way of doing the goal, the best way of scoring that.
I remember
and the interesting,
this.
And the interesting thing is, people who practice their moves, that actually think about going through their moves, do better than the ones who just do it. So the thing is that golfers do this. They will practice a golf swing without a golf club in their hands. They'll practice a swing and then they can do it in their minds. People who do a basketball, people who do tennis, you'll often see people doing things where they're actually practicing in their mind. Now, they might have a slight body movement, they might have a total body movement. But the thing is, in their mind's eye, in their mind's muscle memory, they start to practice the things that work for them, and that is what makes them more successful.
And that's exactly what coaches do with them.
Exactly.
What are the Olympians thinking just before takeoff? the swimmers, so you see the cameras going past their faces, and they're just, if they're not greeting you, they're actually in their zone. What are they visualizing? They're visualizing their success, their personal best, or winning. So they really have gone through an exercise of coaching their minds. And hence, how wonderful is it to be in hypnotherapy, to be able to take our clients through this journey of positive visualization.
Absolutely. In fact, it's really interesting. When people go into that positive visualization space, it's basically a self-hypnosis. So we teach people how to find that space so that they can actually work through their success process. So they come out at the end with the result that they want. And I always say, plan for the result you want, then practice the result that you want. So actually you can visualize that you've done the thing that you needed to do with a positive result, and then work back from that to get all of those things in place, and then practice it so that you can get the result that you're planning for. So it's really interesting, you know, that your thought process, the way that you do things, practicing it, imagining it, setting the goal, and then practicing to get to that goal, it's a winning formula.
And we use a nice technique in hypnotherapy too, where we get the clients into the state, into the hypnotic state, and then they move themselves forward to where they've achieved the goal. And then they meet that wiser self of theirs, the self that's actually already achieved that. And then they teach themselves what skills they needed to learn to become that.
Yes.
And therefore, then they bring that back into the present, and then they know what they need to do without us knowing any part of this. They do it all by themselves.
Yeah, I actually love that. I like to work very content free. So that's where I'm guiding people, not necessarily having to know everything that's going on or the full story, just the things that they have going on, and guiding them through those thought processes. So they get to that end goal and can go, yeah, okay, so I not only can do it, I know how I can do it, and I can actually start to thread and weave that whole process into everything they're doing from day one. And so it becomes their way of being and their way of doing things. And we all know that the trance state is where you have the heightened skill sets. That's where you really just do things because you've got that conscious competence you've created, and then you get to the unconscious competence where it's just doable and with ease. And that's one of the really important things I think that is a gift that comes with the hypnosis, and that is that you actually get the ability to get yourself into a trance state much faster, because you start to understand your process and you start to understand that pattern where you get into that really focused, concentrated coach state, as you do when you're about to, you know, do a great performance, perhaps on stage, or you're going to do a great sales presentation or business presentation, or you're going to run a race, or you're just going to go into the gym and really hit your marks and go and do the work that you need to do to get the health results that you want. Yeah,
that's right. And that's very well said. So I guess if we were to move on to another twisted way of thinking, or an unhelpful way of thinking, or technically cognitive distortion, how about the should statements?
Oh, yes.
Where you criticize yourself, or you criticize other people with shoulds or shouldn'ts or musts, or you ought to and you have to, or other similar, which we call offenders. So for example, you tell yourself that things should be the way that you hoped or expected them to be. After playing a difficult piece on the piano or any other musical instrument, a gifted pianist may say to themselves, I shouldn't have made so many mistakes. And this made her feel so disgusted, and this is a story that I'm quoting, that she quit practicing for several days, all because of the shoulds, and I should have done this, and that was disgusting, and I should. So you could be gifted in something, or you could be talented in any area, but because you should have done better, or you shouldn't have done it like that, that's enough. That's powerful enough to stop you from practicing or progressing. That's how deadly the shoulds are, and the oughts and shouldn't have, and all of those, that way of thinking.
Yeah, they're very, the shoulda, coulda, woulda, they really can be very detrimental. Often people who are grieving go through the coulda, shoulda, you know, if only sort of thing as well. And it's kind of interesting that there isn't actually any should or rules about how you do certain things. Of course, there's cultural rules and there's religious rules and things like that. But when it comes down to something being in the past, something that you've done, it's really a lesson time. It's like, as you call it, you know, that time where you're learning. If something should have been a certain way, well, perhaps it's best to get things into place so that they can be as close to that as they can be, but they don't have to be exactly that. You know, getting that agility to go, yeah, it might have been better if it had been like that, but I'm going to work with what I've got.
Yeah, and it's just as dangerous when they put that language to the future as well. I should do this, I need to do that, and I should have planned like this, and you know, I should, and I ought to, and all you know, all that stuff. So
it's the word of frustration. If you want frustration right now, or you want frustration in the future, that's the word. So it really, if you don't want frustration in your life, don't continue to use that kind of phrase or wording, because it's just going to lead to that level of and anger as well. I mean, that's the other thing, frustration and anger. And the thing is that, you know, you can only do your best. Yeah. And just continue to do your best.
That's right. When I have clients and it's safe to do so, I usually have a playful conversation with them and tell them, right, from now on, you're not allowed to use the word should, especially if they've demonstrated that that's all they live off. So it's really about introducing a mindfulness activity to them so that when they start using that language of should, because it's a cognitive distortion, stop yourself. Because that's actually landed you in the field of trouble.
Absolutely.
Let's see, what else have we got for a cognitive?
Well, I was thinking that an interesting one is our mental filters. Only paying attention to certain types of evidence, and you know, perhaps only noticing your failures and not noticing, you know, your successes. I'll give a little bit of an example, and people often go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. But when you've decided that you're like, you really, really want something, say you're looking at the type of, like, oh, say you've just decided to buy a certain type of car, all of a sudden, all you're going to start seeing is that kind of car everywhere. Or perhaps a woman who has just, you know, she's wondering if she's pregnant or not. And so all day for the next few days before she tests, she's going to be looking at, and all she's going to see is pregnant women and babies.
Yes.
Because that's what her focus is on. Or, you know, even when it's, you know, maybe you're sort of going, oh, what do I cook for dinner? And, oh, I'm going to get this certain thing. And as soon as you start looking at that, all you see is all of the evidence of that being around you. So the filters that we apply, the thoughts that we have around, you know, obviously the filters we've got, they actually start to form where our focus starts to go. So if you start focusing on things that are, you know, negative, then you're going to find evidence of negative things. If you start to focus on finding positive things, you're going to find the evidence that's positive. So being able to understand that an unhelpful way of thinking is having the wrong mental filters. So let's start to give yourself some different ways of focusing by having different filters that allow you to see, oh, yeah, I can do that. Or, yeah, that's a different way I can go. Giving you possibilities.
Yeah, that's right. Possibilities, different options, different ways of thinking and being. So it's like you've just got to find a way that they go into themselves and identify what the negatives are that they keep dwelling on. And even I think it's a really good exercise to get people to voice them and then get them by themselves to say, what are the positives that you have been ignoring? I've spoken to a group of teenage kids, boys and girls, just so I can discover what's going on for them. And this group is specifically Year 12 HSC kids. What's gone on for them now during this difficult time and all the challenges with restrictions that have come about. And I feel very compassionate for them, and I really understand their world. But did I really come face to face with all the negatives? And so right at the end, after receiving all the negatives about what's going on, part of the exercise was, okay, so now with those negatives, I didn't ask them what the positives were. I said to them, what negatives have you been ignoring? Because that's the thing. It's one way to be negative, and then find positives. The problem is when you're negative and deliberately ignore the positives. That deliberate ignoring becomes automatic. So they may not know that, oh, have I been deliberately ignoring it? Well, you've been ignoring it. So now let's not ignore it. Let that become automatic to see the positives, because that's the pattern that we want to break. Do you understand what I mean?
I love that. I love that. Because the thing is, people do get into that behavioral thing of just doing the thing that they're always doing and not really being cognizant of the fact that that's just the pattern that they're running all the time. So being aware of those things, that's beautiful. I love that.
Good. That looks like our listeners, I hope they love that too. I think we're moving nice and smoothly using simple language and an example at least for each cognitive distortion. I hope that this becomes really educational or even for people who have already heard and learned or understand cognitive distortions. It's actually a nice refresher to go through them again and to remind ourselves, even if we feel we're doing okay, to remind ourselves that they're there hidden in the background waiting to pounce sometimes. So
well, exactly. And I, you know, one of the things that people don't realize is a cognitive distortion is labeling, is going, oh, you know, they're stupid or I'm stupid or something like that, which actually just leaves you in a very, very dull place. It doesn't give you any way of sort of seeing the depth and the breadth of things. It sort of means that you're seeing a very small thing instead of actually seeing the larger picture and being more involved. And, you know, it's interesting that people do go through this thing of labeling everything because they feel that it makes life more simple. And in a way, it does, but in not a good way. You know, life is meant to be rich and to actually see things with more than just one viewpoint. You know, see things for all of the value that it has. Yes, there'll be some negative and some positive, but find all of those things, you know, find the real depth.
It becomes really dangerous to find yourself labeling yourself, because the truth is, label your behavior, label your pattern. I'm in the early childhood industry and we're not allowed to label the children. We can say what you did was a silly thing. You can label the behavior, but we can't say you're silly for doing that.
And rightly so, because once you start labeling a child and they start seeing them
silly
through the filter of that label, I mean, we're talking about that, you know, the mental filters, there's a way that two cognitive distortions really, really work to harm someone. So you know, not giving somebody a filter where they look at themselves through a label, extremely important. And breaking that down, if they do start to have that labeling, being able to break that down so that they stop doing that and start labeling behavior, as you said, not the person, and being able to remove that filter completely and to change it.
And it becomes really important, like in the early childhood industry, you separate the kids and you've got like 0 to 2s and you've got 2 to 3s and the 3 to 5s, and the 2 to 3s are they call them the terrible 2s, and I say that with a beautiful smile and lots of love. I love that age group, but gee, it's challenging. And that's because they haven't learned their language to express themselves very well. But so there's a lot of fights that we sometimes have to break up, and it's all about sharing. And so really, we can't say something to a child who's hurt another child, because they can bite or pinch or hit or throw. Anything can happen in that little room. So intervention is really important, but strategic intervention is really important, so that the kids don't feel that they need the intervention. We use strategies so that we can distract or redirect. That way there's smooth flow. But if someone hits another, we can't say and should not say, because of you, he's crying. But we can say, because of what happened, now he's crying. So whilst they can't communicate back to us, they can communicate by listening. So we have to use very important language. Now, these children are at home. Now, we've learned label behavior and do not label children, but who's taught the rest of the world that one little tip? It's not common knowledge. Everyone's done that accidentally or without harm. And yet parents can say, oh, you're an idiot, or you're silly, or you caused that, you made mum sad. Now,
exactly.
If
there's one thing, if there's one thing I'd love people to take away from this podcast, it's that what you've just said. This is something that is so fundamentally important for everybody to learn about labeling, that it actually doesn't do anything except cause long-term issues. The thing is, and people rise to the expectations that you give them. So if you give somebody I'm so proud of you, you're doing so well, thank you so much for doing that, then people tend to rise to that. They'll start to, have those behaviors. But when you start using labeling language that actually pushes someone down, that makes them believe that their behavior is who they are, then you're going to get a replication of that behavior over and over again, because why should they try harder? Why?
And then they live up to that reputation as well.
That's right. So whatever you create is what they live up to.
If you keep telling a child you're a bully, they'll be a bully, because they're like, it's the label. I'm a bully. I'm allowed to act like this. I'm fitting my description, for example.
Exactly. It's and this is one of the things that I hope people hear, that the language that we use, this is why, the NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, if you're saying something, that will have an impact, and the way that you say it will have an impact, and the way you pace it will have an impact. So being able to lead a child into a new way of being by giving them the way to aspire rather than the way to behave within a certain label is going to completely change the dynamics of the family, of their relationships, everything. It's just so important, so important.
No, I'm glad we touched on that.
Yeah.
No, I think that was a really, really good discussion that we had on it, and we put some good points there. So
I was going to mention... Sorry?
Lose the labeling.
Yes, lose the labeling. Just stop it. if I was going to give any kind of, just stop it. It's not going to be beneficial for anybody. So leading on to that, I'll go to magnification and minimization. So we often call that catastrophizing. So people will, start to have thoughts where everything's a catastrophe. So blowing them out of proportion rather than, sort of leading up to what there is that they could do. They'll say, oh, I couldn't possibly go there because it will be a disaster or something will go wrong. And they're actually creating this thought process that they won't even approach something because they believe it's going to be horrendous. So it's kind of we also call it an avoidance methodology. So people blow things out of proportion and then they want to avoid it, or they'll minimize something, which is the other part of the, unhelpful thinking or cognitive distortion, which is, they'll actually make it seem less important than it really is. So, I didn't do that report, but it wasn't that important, when maybe it actually is. So both those can actually work against you. Being able to look at things and go, give them the right weight and proportion that's attributable to them. So don't go to the complete, it won't work, catastrophization. and don't go to the minimization. Look at things and be able to have that, okay, I can see that this has got a certain level of importance and I need to address it in that way.
Yeah, that's the thing. You just strategically planned your way out of the catastrophe or the magnification, because to magnify is to make it huge in your mind, and therefore what follows that is a huge overwhelm of emotion, where really it's just one normal situation that happened. Oh, I've seen that happen. I remember once my husband dropped the ice cube tray, and so all the ice just went all over the floor. It's just ice, isn't it? It's just water at
Absolutely.
the end.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was really close by, and I saw him just go into a freeze, and he was just staring at it. So I thought, and it was truly just seconds, and I saw him go into that, and I thought, wow. So I just quickly got a tea towel and just scooped it right up, because I've got 2 dogs who are going to go chew it up as well. So I thought I didn't want them to have a brain freeze. So I quickly just scooped it up with the towel, and he was still just standing there. It was just ice.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the thing is that there's the fright, flight, freeze, and, you know, in the moment, something that's so, in a way, trivial can make somebody just freeze, because they're like, what do I do next? Because they haven't, you know, expected it to happen. But yeah, I find it kind of interesting when I actually see people going through processes where they're not in an agile state of mind when something happens. And often I think it is because they've gone through creating it, you know, that it's a massive thing when actually it's not. And so they'll overdo their response to it. And as you said, overwhelm. Because really what happens is when people do catastrophize things, they do go into that fight, flight, or freeze. And it's a catastrophization, so you actually don't get to do anything. And the best way to avoid a catastrophe is to do something positive to avoid the catastrophe.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But
Plan.
isn't it amazing?
Do something different.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing if you catch someone out doing a catastrophe, you can ask them, what were you just doing? And if it's in the right moment, they can say, oh, I saw this on the news. Then all of a sudden I thought, oh, my son's driving too. And what if that happens to him? And then we can't go to that party tomorrow. And they create this catastrophe because they just saw something for 30 seconds on the news. So and then can...
In this... No, go ahead. It's really, you're going great.
I was just going to say that can really lead into practicing that way of being, using the It's great to have an imagination, but not if you're going to create mental movies of catastrophes all the time.
Well, see, this is one of the things. You know, we're living in a world where we've got so much multimedia, we've got so much social media, and the thing is that, you know, things do and can get blown out of proportion. You know, there'll be something that happened on another side of the planet. It's nowhere near us, yet people will be reacting as if it's a current and present threat right here. And that's not a good thing for your body, for your mind, or anything. Having all of those cortisols going through your body because you're allowing yourself to go into that overwhelm and stress. It's really important to assess your situation right now in the moment. I'm nowhere near, you know, wherever it is. It could be Banda Aceh, it could be Thailand, it could be, you know, New York. We're sitting here in Sydney or Melbourne or whatever on the other side of the planet. So what's happening over there, it may be horrible, but we don't have to allow ourselves to go into that. That could be happening here. We need to look at our situation, assess it appropriately. Don't look at our feelings of feeling, you know, worried or fearful. It's not appropriate to the situation. Allow yourself not to go to that overwhelm of something that's not happening to you.
That's right.
So you'll often see that people, you know, will start to, you know, really get into a bit of a state about how they feel when they're nowhere near any kind of danger. It's good to go through the pace of, if that happened here, what would I do? And have a plan. Like, for the fires that we had in New South Wales and, you know, the whole of Australia, where, you know, people were actually potentially near a fire front at some point, and people, you know, could start making plans and start to help others. And being in action is really important, because you do not want to go into freeze when you need to go into action. So being able to work with and communicate with others to create a plan, having a plan, actioning a plan, that's the way to deal with things and not go into overwhelm. If I'd say one thing to people, get into action. Don't just whir the wheels of your mind going over and over and ruminating on it. Get into action,
right.
get plans together.
Because that emotional frame sometimes can lead to some creative imagination, which has the power to create physiological symptoms.
Absolutely.
And increased heart rate and feelings in the stomach and headaches and sweaty palms. And then
I have treated so many people who have got IBS, their irritable bowel syndrome. And when we come down to it, anxiety, overthinking, you know, overwhelm, all of those things, when we've addressed those issues, the symptoms of the IBS dissolve. These people who, you know, because often, you know, a lot of that resides in their gut health. You know, your actual gut has as many neurons in it as a cat's brain, you know. So when you're doing overthinking and doing all these things and having cortisols running through you and sitting in overwhelm, your gut's going to be affected. So when somebody says to me, you know, they've got IBS, I'll usually find out that they do have anxiety and all of these, you know, comorbidities, where you sort of go, okay, you know, can tick those off. Let's address the anxiety and all these underlying issues. And then their IBS is kind of like, it's not worrying me at the moment. Great, let's stay with that. Let's improve your processes so that you're in this state where it's not affecting you, because those other things are being put into perspective. And when people learn how to not do those things and they start to have better gut health, then they start to get in that zone where they just don't do that overthinking, anxiety, overwhelm and everything anymore. And they're in this healthy zone, which I adore. I love it when people have that process. So, you know, it really is about this way that they think, this unhelpful thinking, this cognitive distortions, all of those things that come into it that give you that ill health. You know, you don't have anxiety unless you're overthinking. It's kind of comorbid.
Yeah, very good point there, and very nice example of your IBS client as well. It's a good success story, a nice way to plan out and to make self-discoveries, and always to see that there's reasons, there's causes, whether you know or you don't know. Treating anxiety and treating your thought processes can be extremely helpful. So
Absolutely. So we've still got a couple to go. Have we got enough time today?
Well, that's up to you, Kerry. I guess we can do a couple more, or we can do a couple more on the next one.
Whatever you like, but I would like to just mention jumping to conclusions.
Well, then let's jump to that conclusion, shall we?
So here's the thing. People tend to mind read, or they'll fortune tell. So they're coming up with imagining what somebody else is thinking, which might not be true, or they're predicting the future. And how do they determine that they can predict the future? How do they determine that they know what somebody's thinking? And often the case is they don't. In fact, we don't. So, you know, it's interesting that, you know, when you're jumping to all of these conclusions, you actually may be losing the reality completely, because you're going, oh, I think it's this, therefore it is this. So, you know, I suppose an example of it is, you know, when somebody's going, oh, you know, I don't think they like me, and, you know, I imagine that, you know, they think that I'm this or I'm that. And then they get an opportunity at some point to actually speak to that person, and that person really wanted to be their friend. You know, I actually had a client who had a co-worker that they were working with, and they thought that person did not like them. And, you know, they had different speaking styles and sense of humor and things like that. But essentially, when it all came down to it, it was just a case of they hadn't had much of an opportunity for interaction. And when they did, they found their commonalities. And, you know, that woman was like, oh, I actually thought you didn't like me. And she was like, I thought you didn't like me either. It was never the case. Neither person fortune told or imagined what the other person was thinking correctly. And now they're very close friends. You know, so there's, you know, what we think isn't necessarily the fact.
That's right. And that's a nice happy ending there. I must say that I really take seriously this cognitive distortion, because I find that it can create a lot of trouble in one's life, and most importantly, it can create a lot of trouble within family life and in relationships. And so when I notice that when someone is really heavily into this frame, I get permission off them to interrupt them, and without offending them, when they're in my clinic, I like to say to them, I hope you don't mind, but this is my job right now. I'm going to challenge you. And I've always had everyone say, yeah, no, that's fine. I realize that. So when they say, or he does this, excuse me, or she should be doing this, I stop and say, oh, how did you know that? And what makes you believe that? Or where's the evidence for that? So they can't even tell their story, because I'm just firing and interrupting that pattern, because jumping to conclusions is not going to get them anywhere. And I don't want them to feel that they can get away with saying that in therapy, when if I break that down in the end, and which is in 5 minutes, they say, oh, okay, so maybe I've been jumping to conclusions. So that way I never had to say, look, you're jumping to conclusions, because in their mind, they don't like to hear an accusation like that. But once we played that game, then they say, okay, I get it. I have no evidence for that, and I'm just assuming. And there's one thing we should never do is assume. I've been married for 20 odd years, and I don't play the assumption game, not out loud anyway, because it's just not helpful.
I actually said to my husband when we first started dating, I said, please always ask me, because I'll give you an honest answer about things. Don't assume anything, because, you know, sometimes I'm thinking things and you won't have any clue what they are unless I tell you. And I always find it really interesting when people say to me things like, oh, he should know. It's like, did you tell him? No, but he should know. It's like, yeah, no, how exactly? You know, but he should know. He should know me by now. It's like, look, we always change, and people really, really appreciate you just having an open conversation with them. If you really want something, say, hey, for my birthday, really like this. Don't hint at it, because people aren't always good at hints. So if you really want to communicate.
Use your words.
Get to the point. Yeah. So I think you have a much. Yeah.
No, you go.
Oh, no. I was just saying, I just think people have a much better time of things and a better relationship when they just openly communicate and don't expect the other person to, you know, fortune tell or mind read. You know, I'm not a mind reader. I've always said, you want to tell me something? Go for it. I can't mind read.
That's really important, and that's why we play that game in clinic.
Yes.
So we shoot it down. They might do that in their lives out there, but when they come into the clinic and we shoot that down with their permission, and so that they know that we're deliberately doing that, it really stops them from spending the next 20, 30 minutes trying to convince you that they know.
Yeah,
so really,
and maybe it'll stop them from the next 20 or 30 years expecting people to mind read them and being disappointed all the time.
So then we say, right, what we did here, how can you do this by yourself? And we get them to give their own examples of, okay, so quite often I'm assuming that if he or she doesn't answer the phone, that means that this and that's happening. And if they don't call me back within 5 minutes, then that and that's happening. And you see how that leads to other cognitive distortions in themselves. But
absolutely, that's the catastrophization. Exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
Right. And the emotional frame. And
yep, absolutely.
So once we identify that, the whole problem is how you're feeling about it. You've created this in your own head. And so stop it. Just stop it. So when you see that you're doing that, stop it. So we get them to practice that. And that can be part of their tasking. Set your reminders, put notes down that you can't allow yourself to continue jumping to conclusions, and get them into that language. Am I jumping to a conclusion? People habitually create language for themselves as reminders of what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Did I ring my mum? And all of that stuff. Say to themselves, if this is a problem for them, am I jumping to conclusions? Am I trying to do fortune telling? So stop that pattern and you'll eliminate a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And sometimes we need to create a bit of an anchor so that they can say, oh, hold on a second, and take a step back. So if they catch themselves using the word should, or, you know, they should, you know, the whole, you know, mind reading thing, if they start to do certain things using certain words, then that could be the anchor to go, oh, I really need to think about this a bit better. I need to get a bit of distance from that and really work out, see if there's any evidence of that. Working their way through processes rather than just jumping to those conclusions. So it's interesting. We can tell stories, but them being able to recognize it and tell their own story about where they do it, so that they can find a place where they do not do it and they stop doing it. That's really important as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it's really important that people, or especially for our listeners, to see what kind of self-improvement we can all make for ourselves. We don't have to worry about self-improvement for anybody else. They are responsible for themselves. But within ourselves, if we find that we're falling into certain thought patterns which lead to certain behaviors, stop, step back and say, right, fallen into that trap somehow. It's okay. I just won't continue to do that. But if you're really finding that you're doing that and it's an actual problem, and we know it's a problem when it's really disrupting your daily life, and it's disrupting your routine, your sleep, your appetite, your work, your relationships, then it really is time to go to a therapist who's skilled in this area to say, right, my thoughts, this is what's happening for me. And therefore, the right therapist, the skilled therapist, can then identify what the cognitive distortions are and then work with that. And hypnotherapy is a great tool for this. Learning to learn and unlearning to learn and learning to unlearn.
Absolutely. I love that. Learning to learn and learning to unlearn, because the thing is, the patterns that we've learnt in the past, we can also unlearn. And people don't realize that. They think that, oh, they've done this all the time, so they're always going to continue. No, it's okay. Those patterns can change, and given the right, you know, process and doing your homework, they will change. They
Absolutely.
not only can change, they will change.
Some people think they can't change and that they've always been like this. And then you know how we tackle that. And we come back to we get them to let us know that, okay, yes, I wasn't always like this. And when we take them back through discussion, were you like this at 5? And how were you when you were 10? And then how were you at 15? And then how were you at 20 and 25, etc. And then they show you that, oh yeah, I was different. So why do you think you'll be the same in 5 years? You change every 5 years. You change every year. You change every week. So,
well, I like to remind people that, you know, from a molecular perspective, our body absolutely changes. Every cell in our body, except for the enamel on our teeth, every cell in our body is changed in 7 years. So
doesn't the enamel on our teeth change?
Only the enamel on our teeth remain the same.
Oh, we better look after that then.
That's right. That's very important. So, but the thing is, when your body can change that much, you know, we're shedding skin cells, we're growing hair, we're doing all these things. Our brain is learning new ways of doing things all the time.
Every second.
A few years ago, if somebody had said to somebody, oh, you have to remember a PIN number to put in your phone so that, you know, you can do the things that you need to do, people go, oh, you've got to be crazy. So younger people now, they're going to be doing things that they have never even imagined in the next few years. There are going to be jobs that never existed a year ago are going to be commonplace. All of these different things are going to happen. If anything's going to happen, it's going to be change. So one of the most important things to understand is that we change constantly. The way that we think can change, the way that we behave can change, the way that we do things can change. All of these things are up for change. If you have a style, what we call a fixed attribution style, that nothing will change and you won't change, the reality is that can change too. That fixed attribution style can also change. And it comes down to having thought, the thought patterns that will work for you and serve you, and not doing the ones that are unhelpful to you. So it's really interesting that we talk about the 10, cognitive distortions, which, there's varying degrees of them through everybody. But at the end of the day, when you know how to work your way through these, when you get to become agile, when you've had a coach or a therapist who says to you, hey, you don't have to be like this, you can be like this, and you have that opening of possibility, you don't have to have that fixed attribution style. You can actually have change. And not only is it something that is helpful to you, but you can actually learn how to welcome it and to receive it and to become that new change. It's a really powerful and positive thing. And you do it with one little thing, and then you can do it with something else, and you do it with something else. And eventually change becomes really not only possible, but probable. You
Absolutely.
will have positive outcomes and changes.
Embracing change, for me, I find that extremely healthy. And I came to learn very early in the piece, back in my early days of being in the childhood industry, when it was time at the end of the year to say to staff, okay, next year you're going to move from the baby's room and you'll be in the preschool room, or you're moving from the preschool room, you're going to go to the toddler room. And I really got to see some of the staff saying, oh, but I'm part of the preschool. The preschoolers are going to leave anyway and go to big school. So it's not like they're going to miss the kids. We're all going to miss the kids because they're going to big school. Or I always like to move one person up from the baby's room to go into the 2 to 3's room. So at least there's consistency of care. So when the babies turn 2 and they go up to the new room, they've got a consistent face, a carer. And yet some of the staff members were like, oh, I can't leave my room. They began to own this room. And so whilst I appreciate that, I saw there's a fear of change, but there's reasons why I move staff around from room to room. One has to move up with the kids to keep them consistent, and parents like to see staff members follow up. And others actually need a change. I've got to get them out of the room just for something different. So the strategy I would use is, oh, okay, so you want to stay in your room? Well, how about this? Just go into the new room for 3 weeks when we change. And then you know what? And that's just to help your kids settle into the new room. And then I'll move you back. And then that gave them that sense of security that, oh, okay, I'll go back into my room. I'm just going there temporarily. Kerry, there was never one staff member that went back. All they needed was time to adjust and to embrace the change.
Yeah, that transitional time. And it's interesting that, when I look at people who are seeking assistance, it's often during times of transition or fear of transition. So something's happened and they need to change, or they want to change and they don't yet know how to change, or they don't think it's possible to change, and we're their last option. But when they start to see that not only can they transition, but it's going to happen anyway, with them or without them, and they can learn how to go with it, and they can learn that new process. It gives them that sense of safety and ability to go, oh, okay, so I can go from here to here, and I can do it with, a process that isn't going to be painful. It might actually be enjoyable. And so, it's funny when
I was just going to say that hypnotherapy again, oh my goodness, the change that occurs within their own resourceful state, where they get to visualize and embrace that change and do it all by themselves, they actually come out of that excited for change. And that to to watch that happen and to know that the evidence is there because of the way they spoke before the session and the way they're speaking straight after the session. And you see, gee, how effective, and well done to them for doing the best job that they can during hypnosis. Really, really great avenue.
I love that. You know, it's actually one of my favorite things about what I do is that people do come in a certain way or a certain mindset. And then, you know, we work with them and then we do the trance work and they do come out of it going, I can do that, because they've had a bit of a play, a bit of a practice in that trance state, just allowing themselves to do that. And so there is that possibility, and they do see that way of doing things. They do see that new way because they've practiced it in their head when we've given them that opportunity to just go with it, just play with it, be there in that space, feel that transition.
How about
work with it?
That's right. No, that's good. How about when one of the other distortions, cognitive distortions, overgeneralization?
Ah, yes. What's your
always
experience
happens
of the good old...
to me. I always get dumped. I always fail. I've never been good enough, or it's just like you generalize everything. And like we've been taught, we've got to say, what, never? Haven't you ever? Not even once? I mean, we see it amongst friends. It's just common language that we've used until it becomes a problem space. And it's actually not a good way to be speaking to yourself or to others about yourself, because we've always got the opportunity to say, except when.
Exactly. Except it was actually one of the best things when we were doing our training was that it was like, you know, somebody make that overgeneralization is that except when you don't, or except when you do. And you sort of go, oh yeah, except for when I don't. Oh yeah, except for when I do. And the reality is it just makes you realize that all of these overgeneralizations, they're just words that we're using without thinking properly, without allowing ourselves to know in reality.
But our unconscious mind is always listening and believing. That's right.
Yes.
So when we're saying, I'm always, I don't know, I'm always being yelled at, and I'm always, even someone to say, oh, I'm always drinking. Well, no, except when you're not.
Exactly. And the thing is that when you're doing that, those very words that you're using that are the overgeneralizations, again, as you said, the subconscious is listening and it's looking for evidence. So it's going to find the evidence that supports that statement. So finding them when I don't, you know, except when you do, and the except when I don't, you know, they're very key in getting a change.
Yeah. Or to, you know, you can say to someone, you're always sleeping, or except when you're not. So really catch yourself out and find the exceptions to everything. Or
absolutely.
You hear kids say, I'm always getting in fights. We can't let them get away with that. We have to say to them, did you get into a fight today? And if they say yes, did you fight all day? Did you fight at recess? Did you fight at lunch? Did you fight in class as well? Oh, so you're not fighting all day. You're not always getting into fights. Did you have friendly conversations? Yes. Oh, okay, so that wasn't a fight. So we've really got to work on our language to make them say, yeah, okay, I don't always get into fights, but you know what I mean. No, you don't always get into fights. Sometimes you get into fights. We really need to correct that, break that pattern.
Again, that leads into the other, distortion, which is labeling. It's like when you do that over generalizing, you go falling into the, trap of the labeling, because your mind, your subconscious mind starts to label you even if nobody else is. So it's really important. The way that you're describing that is perfect.
And it blends into that mental filter, looking at the negatives, dismissing the positives. So have we covered everything? Let me look at my list.
I think we have. Oh, personalization, where you blame yourself or take responsibility for things. I like to call it over-responsibility, where, somebody's always looking to, take on, something that's completely out of their, not only out of their responsibility, but it's also out of their ability to do anything about it. So they're taking on too much. They think it's all their fault, or they think that, it's all somebody else's fault, perhaps. that something's going on a certain way. But, being able to say, hey, not everything's your responsibility, not everything's somebody else's responsibility. There's a whole lot of different layers here. And, how do you determine that you're always at fault or they're always at fault? It's like, oh, okay, maybe there's some things that we need to challenge here as well.
Yeah, I see that blame often leads to feelings of guilt or inadequacy, and it brings up a lot of emotional disturbance. And at a personal level, I don't like the blame game at all. I don't ever believe it's anybody's fault. Things happen, whether they happen correctly or non-correctly, or ethically or non-correctly. I like to get rid of that blame. But there is one really nice session that I like to do with my clients, and I've called it the emotional detox session. It's a hypnotherapy session where we work a lot on any self-blame, past or current, or blaming others or blaming self, and giving them an opportunity to release that, because it's just not a nice thing to live with. And I don't think there's anything friendly about the blame game. I think it's quite detrimental to one's mental, emotional wellness. So
I agree
detoxify
completely.
that. Yeah.
I like that. Emotional detox.
Yeah, I run emotional detox sessions. So, and I find them extremely empowering, and it's a nice beginning for individuals who come in for that change. So
I think it's really important to sort of people to acknowledge that certain things have happened. So that sounds like an acknowledgement process where they can then start to see what they're doing and have been doing, so they can start saying, oh, don't want to do that anymore, I want to change. So that's beautiful. It's a segues beautifully into now's the time for change.
Yeah, and I really like to respect emotions, and I really like to deliver the message that emotions are there as messages. And I believe they were there to protect you in the first place. However, they don't need to live inside of you any longer, beyond the point that you're willing to let them go. If you feel you've been housing these emotions way too long and you're willing and ready right now to let them go, then we do this right now in a way. And I use imagination, and I give stories of examples of ways other people have done them. And the truth is, people may think about, I don't know, forgiveness and letting go of things, and say they're not ready to, until they are. And that process takes 1 second. To let go of an emotion, to make that forgiveness, takes 1 second. You may want to dwell on it for 3 months or 3 years, but do you want to make that change right now? You can forgive right now if you allow yourself, and if that's where you want to go. It's just them giving themselves permission.
And the permission is so important, because sometimes people think that they have to hold on to something, not realizing that holding on to it is actually quite toxic to them. It's like, it's a situation where I often say sometimes it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. You actually have to let go of that so that you can both be well and move forward. You don't always have to have that person around, but you can certainly not hurt yourself and hold on to things that hold you back, or that cause pain or discomfort, or even, it could be IBS, because you're holding on to something that you really don't need to. It's a case of, now it's time to relax and release that toxicity and get on with other things that are going to be more enjoyable and pleasurable, because you don't have that.
Kerry, I think we've not only gone way over the time that we expected, but gee, did we cover some beautiful content. I'm actually so glad that we had the opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves as professionals or experts as we are, but the opportunity that we've given our listeners to learn, or to reconfirm, or to be curious, or for whatever we've done. I hope we've done well enough for all our listeners. So I really thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to discuss this in the detail that we did, with our examples as well. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I just want to say to the listeners out there, if you have any of these things that are perhaps a cognitive distortion or an unhelpful thinking style of your own, it's time to go out, get the therapist, get the coaching, so that you know how to release it, how to change it. And the best time to start is really now. So give yourself that time to go, okay, I don't have to be stuck. I don't have to suffer. What's my next step? And make that next step, which is to get in contact with somebody who will be there for you, who's wanting to help you and to give you the new, different start and not be stuck anymore that you deserve.
Well said, Kerry. So we've been listening to Kerry Bailey from Sydney Hypno and Amanda Dounis from Positive Thinking Clinic. See you next time.
Bye. And thanks, Amanda. I love it.
Thank you too.
Bye.
And a warm welcome to today's listeners. Allow me to introduce myself as the host of today's episode. My name is Amanda Dounis. I'm the founder of the Positive Thinking Clinic located at Wallow Creek, Sydney. Here at the Positive Thinking Clinic, I see clients of all ages. I see individuals, couples, families, and small groups. I conduct psychotherapy and use a variety of modalities delivered through counselling techniques and hypnotherapy. I am a professional counsellor, clinical hypnotherapist, and strategic psychotherapist. I'm an early childhood teacher and an NLP master practitioner. To learn more about what I do and what I offer, visit my website, www.positivethinkingclinic.com.au. The easiest way to connect with me on social media is to search my name, Amanda Dounis, or my clinic, Positive Thinking Clinic. You may also access my social media at the bottom of my website. I am the author of My Coping Skills Handbook, aimed at kids 8 to 12 years of age. I have also turned this into an online course. I have a range of podcasts that can be found on amandadounis.podbean.com. In addition to the Positive Thinking Clinic, I am the owner of 4 early learning centres. I am passionate about quality care and emotional wellness of all ages. I believe we set the foundation for emotional wellness from a very young age. My early learning centres are licensed as Positive Living Skills Services. I also have an emotional wellness and kids Facebook group. One of my greatest hobbies is learning. I think I am always enrolled in a variety of courses, no matter how small. I enjoy adding to my skill set. As an integrative therapist, I learn diverse skills and select the best fit for any situation. If you wonder if I have any other hobbies, I am also into fitness. I have run a number of marathons, including 2 ultra marathons. So that's me in a nutshell. If you want to get in touch, you can use the contact form on my website, positivethinkingclinic.com.au. I would love to hear from you. Signing out and moving forward. You're listening to Amanda Dounis. Today we welcome Kerry. Kerry is from sydneyhypno.com.au. Welcome, Kerry. Kerry's clinic is located in the inner west of Sydney in Marrickville. She conducts face-to-face and video-based therapy sessions and coaching. She's a senior therapist, coach, and trainer. She's a clinical hypnotherapist, strategic psychotherapist, NLP coach, and trainer. Very skilled. You can engage with Kerry on her social media, Facebook and LinkedIn. She's very responsive. Kerry has conducted compassionate fatigue workshops, family dynamics, workplace and team dynamics, and other various workshops. She's very passionate. Kerry's passionate for the care of animals and people and has been from an early age. She says, I have had parents who modelled care and compassion for all. So I will always focus on what is the best outcome for all, just like my parents. She says this, she'll do this as she goes through life. Her motto is to live a life of integrity. Kerry has a background in NLP going back over 30 years, and she has worked in small business and in corporate for over 20 years. She has been involved in a variety of different activities, sporting events over the years. She's got quite a resume. She's passionate for animal welfare. She has volunteered for over 35 years. Amazing. Kerry says, I love my family and my friends, and I feel blessed to be a part of such wonderful people and working in the field that I love. Kerry studied at IAP, the Institute of Applied Psychology. From there, she entered into the arena of human welfare after having for so many years worked in animal welfare, and she wanted to help her colleagues cope with pressures and frustrations that they face. Kerry says, I have found so much more now, being able to help so many people in so many other walks of life. Amazing. Kerry has recently joined the faculty of her college IAP so that she can help others to follow the paths of care that she loves so much. She sees her future as a continuance of the work that she does right now. And that future is open to so many possibilities. Kerry absolutely loves what she does. If you want to get in contact with her, visit her website. There are so many ways to connect with Kerry. www.sydneyhypno.com.au. So now we're going to welcome Kerry Bailey.